Our lead-off panel this evening, it is a good one. NBC senior national political reporter Sahil Kapoor, who is at Swazi's headquarters, former Democratic New York Congressman, my friend Max Rose, and Mark Chisano, author of the new must-read book, The Fabulous, The Lying, Hustling, Grifting, Stealing, and Very American Legend of George Santos. It is a must-read, and it is out now. Sahil, you've been talking to voters for the last couple of days, right? People came back to vote for this guy, right? Democrats had lost ground. What was it in his unifying message that won over voters? What did they tell you?
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Stephanie. To tie today's two big stories together, now you see why House Republicans wanted to impeach Alejandro Mayorkas before this special election, because they did it with a single vote margin. If they did not have that extra vote, or if Tom Suozzi was sworn in for that impeachment, it would not have passed. That is the importance of one single vote in this wafer-thin House Republican majority. Yes, voters decided to flip this district back from blue to red and now back to blue. It was won by George Santos in 2022 after, as Steve just laid out, Joe Biden won it comfortably in 2020. It's one of those fluid suburban bellwether battlegrounds that has been so decisive and attract the national mood so closely, which is why Democrats behind me feel so happy about this victory. It's not just about this one race. It's not just about Mazi versus Suozzi, as this contest had been affectionately called around here. It's about the national environment and what this looks like going into the fall election. Voters were concerned about the same national issues that are playing out elsewhere. They were concerned about immigration. They were concerned about crime. This has been a major vulnerability for Democrats, but one thing Tom Suozzi was able to do is go on offense with the border, endorse this bipartisan deal to toughen asylum and border laws, and portray Mazi Pilip, who rejected it, as enthralled to the extremists within her party. That is the argument he repeatedly made on the debate stage, that he made down the stretch. It was unclear whether it would work, but now we have our answer. It worked. He did 20 points better than the Democratic candidate in the Queens slice of this district back in 2022. And Nassau County, where Republicans have had a real resurgence over the last several years, they felt very good and energized going into this. Tom Suozzi is leading in the Nassau, the redder part of this district. It looks at this moment, Stephanie, like a decisive victory.
He's got charisma. He's got a unifying message. And let's talk about immigration, Max, because we've talked about this together on this show. Immigration has been a very big vulnerability for Democrats for years. And it was for Suozzi, right? They were calling him Sanctuary Suozzi, but he turned around, took the facts, and punched them right in the face with them. What can other Democrats learn from this?
Sure, you hit the nail on the head. What Democrats have all too often done is, when they are hit with a vulnerability, it could be the border, it could be anything else, they'll try to change the subject. Okay, I know you are, but what am I? Let's talk about the economy, this and that. And certainly Democrats should go on the offensive on a myriad of issues. But when you are hit with something that is both not true and that the voters are thinking about, talking about, and emotional about, you have to respond. And Tom Suozzi didn't just respond, he did it right to the camera multiple times, and did it quickly in a way that broke through. That's a lesson.
That's my question. How did it break through, right? The president has to deal with misinformation every single day. Look what's happening at the border. Just a week ago, I was talking to a Republican congressman who said, well, Joe Biden really messed up, standing with defund the police. Joe Biden never stood with defund the police. He was very clear about it. In fact, he wanted to reinvest and retrain police departments around the country, but somehow that message doesn't land. Why did it for Suozzi? Because he's got a much smaller universe he needs it to land with?
So I think Suozzi actually did something that immediately strikes you as counterintuitive. He, to the camera, repeated the Republican talking point. He said, they are saying this about me. Politics 101 would often dictate, never do that. Don't give them airtime. He said, they're saying this about me, but it's not true for these reasons. And then he brought it back to values, centered it around his commitment to family, the community, and his longtime service. He said, you know me. This isn't true. That is, of course, something that President Biden can and should replicate.
Mark, how much of this is the George Santos effect, right? It's humiliating for people in Long Island, in Queens, who said, I voted for this guy. How many people were just running from Republicans and Santos after what we just witnessed?
You know, I heard a lot on the campaign trail. Oh, man, I'm so sorry. I feel so bad that Santos won. This is what voters were saying. They felt almost guilty that Santos had been elected on both sides of the aisle. Interestingly, Santos was one of the few policy things he cared about was Mayorkas, was impeaching Mayorkas. This was the thing that he had supported early on, and so there's an irony.
Okay, but hold on. Did Santos really lean into anything, or it was just a game of survival for him? Was there ever a moment he was actually working on constructive policy? Let's be honest.
I think that in terms of Mayorkas, this was kind of one of the policies that he would flick at what his larger sort of bent was, farther right wing, for example. I don't think this was something he cared a ton about personally, but it was just one of the things where he was going along with the tide. He was very good at sort of listening to what people were saying and what was where the wind was blowing, and that was the George Santos we knew.
Sahil, Republicans wanted to get this impeachment vote in tonight before the risk of Swazi. Well, now it's here. He's here. So what's ahead on Capitol Hill, right? There's funding for other legislation. There's the threat of a shutdown.
Yeah, absolutely, Stephanie. Speaker Mike Johnson already had a paper-thin majority. What is thinner than paper? I think Speaker Johnson is about to find out. This goes to 219 for Republicans to 213 for Democrats. He's already dealt with this small band of rebels on either end of his party. It used to be just the far right, but recently some centrist Republicans are also getting in on this, you know, forming small coalitions and rejecting some of the measures that he wants to advance, and they simply cannot pass because Speaker Johnson has largely been trying to move these Republican-only party line bills, some of them messaging bills, and struggling to. So Tom Suozzi will be sworn in. When will he be sworn in? Well, we can report that he wants to be sworn in as early as Thursday. The reason being, tomorrow is a little too soon. Thursday is the last day before a week-and-a-half recess. This is according to a source I spoke to just a few moments ago who's familiar with his thinking on this matter. He could be sworn in as early as this week. If not, it would be about 2 weeks from now, given that the House is on recess. Again, you have government funding coming up, FAA reauthorization, a farm bill that has to be done, some serious business that has to get through Congress this year before the 2024 elections, where the White House, of course, and Congress are up for grabs. Again, this battleground districts like these were among the few that flipped in 2022 and gave Republicans control of the House. Surely Democrats are going to be feeling good about this. And the final thing I'll point out here, Stephanie, is that Republicans are pointing out already that special elections are special, that there are limited amounts that you can gauge into this, that it's not a perfect barometer. There was a snowstorm today. They point out that Tom Suozzi had higher name recognition and all that stuff. We'll hear a lot more of these arguments. No one election is determinative of another, but Democrats have a lot to be happy about tonight.
With Tom Suozzi's win tonight, the House GOP majority has gotten even smaller. Their majority was already so narrow that they had 0 votes to spare. Tonight, when they officially impeached DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, watch this.
On this vote, the yeas are 214 and the nays are 213. The resolution is adopted.
But what does that actually give them? This, of course, was the GOP's second try. Their impeachment vote last week failed in quite spectacular fashion. And you know what we always say, the truth matters, but only if you hear it. And the truth is that Republicans do not have any evidence to support this impeachment. No evidence of high crimes or misdemeanors. Let's bring in former Florida Republican Congressman Carlos Curbelo and former Democratic New York Congressman Max Rose is back with us. Carlos, I asked Max just a few moments ago, what exactly did Republicans gain from this?
Well, Steph, this is what Republicans do. They feed the MAGA base. This is all about appeasing Donald Trump and his supporters. And that's good if you're running in a Republican primary election. It's a problem if you're running in a swing district, as we saw tonight on Long Island. Republicans were very confident. I spoke to some of them over the weekend. They thought they had a lot of momentum on Long Island. They thought they could retain this seat. They thought they had a very good candidate, and it didn't work out. Why? Because what a lot of people are seeing from Congress, from this Republican Congress, is gridlock. It's Republicans obstructing bipartisan policy. House Republicans specifically refusing to even take up bipartisan bills passed by the Senate. We're witnessing that right now with this Ukraine funding bill, and also with the bipartisan border bill that Senators Sinema, Murphy, and Lankford negotiated. So this is what happens in swing districts. I represented one. I know what it's like. And if you are constantly just catering to your base, those swing voters are going to punish you.
I want to talk about that Ukraine funding in a second, Carlos. But what Suozzi did was he kept talking about the border. When Republicans blocked their own bill, he got right at the podium and repeated it over and over and punched him between the eyes. Did he prove that this misinformation megaphone that they have can be stopped if you force it?
Well, I agree with what Max said earlier on the show. He just owned all of these issues. He spoke truthfully about them. He did distance himself from the Biden administration. I mean, we know the president's numbers on immigration are low, but he called out Republicans. I mean, Republicans had an opportunity to make real progress on the border, to reform asylum policy, which is really the big magnet for illegal immigration in our country, and they refused to because Donald Trump and his base asked them not to do it. Never mind the fact that the country does need immigration reform. Never mind the fact that most voters want Congress to meaningfully address this issue. So Tom Suozzi, who I served with, who I know well, he's a true centrist. He called them out. It came across as sincere because it very likely is. And that's why he got rewarded by New York voters.
Max, there used to be a high bar for impeachments. You needed evidence to support them. There is no evidence supporting high crimes or misdemeanors. If you want to say, I don't like what's happening at the border, we got an illegal immigration problem, Mayorkas isn't the right guy for the job, you can say all those things. But there was nothing presented that was an impeachable offense. But alas, that's the result. How dangerous is it that the bar for impeachment got a whole lot lower tonight?
They didn't even try to claim any type of high crime and misdemeanor. In fact, they didn't even try to claim anything substantiated when it comes to incompetency. All they did was really repeat these baseless political talking points over and over and over again, and then did something that has never happened in the history of this country, which is to impeach a sitting cabinet secretary. So, yes, it is an awfully dangerous precedent, but it is also no coincidence that the same exact day that they did this, they lose a seat in Congress.
By a lot.
By double digits. And they thought, I know for a fact that they thought they were going to win. I know for a fact that they woke up today and they were getting ready for a huge celebration.
Why? How did they miscalculate so much?
Well,
because the base is loud but small.
Yeah, you know what? It's interesting. They are doing what Democrats have been guilty of in the past, which is they're just stuck on social media, right? They, I think, got lost in their own echo chamber. They were not listening to people who aren't tuned into politics each and every day, but care about getting stuff done. And they're looking at this Republican Party that's impeaching people randomly, rejecting bipartisan solutions, can't maintain a leader of their own caucus for any consistent period of time. Like, to hell with these guys. Let's bring the adults back.
Damn. Carlos, let's go back to a point you made a moment ago. Tonight, the Senate passed an aid package for Ukraine and Israel. But Speaker Mike Johnson has already vowed not to bring it to the House floor. What would that accomplish?
Well, it would just further characterize Republicans as members who refuse to work together for the good of the world and the good of the country. And look, Steph, even though, of course, the Speaker is the most powerful position in the House, House Republicans, those centrist Republicans, those other Republicans from Long Island, they don't have to just sit back and take this. They don't have to sit back and let their leaders drag them through the mud and maybe cost them their seats in November. They can stand up and they can say, we are going to work in a bipartisan manner. And they have instruments at their disposal, procedural tools, discharge petition where they can take over the chamber, and they should. And they should say, look, we don't agree with a lot of things that President Biden has done and said, but we do agree with our fellow Democrats on these issues: funding the government, supporting our allies across the world, funding border security, right? And we're going to work with them, and we're going to get it done. They are able to do that. They're not impotent. They don't have to sit back and take this. And I really think that after tonight, some of them are going to start getting more aggressive about taking over the chamber and not letting this small contingent of MAGA congressmen drive the agenda.
It is time for my favorite subject. Let's talk about the economy. January's inflation report is out. But before we look at that, I want to remind you, we have had 26 consecutive months below 4% unemployment. We have not seen that in decades. That is awesome. And our post-pandemic economic recovery is better than any other country in the world. Also awesome. However, we are still stuck with very high prices. And today's data shows that prices of the things that we rely on most, like food and housing, still cost a whole lot. Here now to discuss, Guy Adami, an original member of CNBC's Fast Money, and Ben White, a CNBC contributor and beloved business reporter. Ben, lay this report out for us, because two things can be true, right? We could have a very strong economic recovery. However, life's expensive. You need to eat. If you need to live somewhere, prices are high.
Yeah, housing was a big part of inflation being higher than we'd hoped it would be. And you're right. This economy is complex. It's slightly confusing. The things that you mentioned that are good, job growth, consumer spending, GDP, all good. They are not, however, exactly what the Fed wants to see. And the Fed wants to see inflation get down to 2% annually. It was 3.1 today, higher than 2.9% expectations. And Guy, I don't know about you, but what bothered me was the month-on-month number, 0.4. If you extrapolate that over a year, you're talking 4 to 5% inflation, and the Fed will not stand for that. And Wall Street obviously was hoping for rate cuts quickly, maybe as soon as March. Not going to get them, probably not till summer, maybe later. That means no goosing the economy further for President Joe Biden. So not a great report for him, albeit the other parts of the economy are doing well. But people care about prices, and they care about them not falling the way they'd like.
The truth matters, but only if you hear it. So here's the truth. They're not winning the war on inflation. Inflation isn't going down. It's just going up less fast. And people watching this will be like, the administration says we're winning the war on inflation. No, they're not, because they see auto insurance was up 20.6%. So if you have to pay for auto insurance, everything's fine. If you don't have to pay for over-the-counter drugs, which was up like 9.8%, everything is fine. All the things that cost money, all the things that are in your daily life are going up. And people talk about, this great economy, which it is on the surface, but things are costing more. And when the president goes on TV and ridicules companies because the 16-ounce box of Cheerios is now 12 and they're charging the same price, guess what? That's inflation, too. The companies will say, you know what, President Biden?
Wrong.
He's not wrong, except that if they want to play the 16-ounce box, it's just going to go up by 25%. Inflation is sticky as hell. People understand that. And that's why, in terms of the economy, the administration's approval rating is probably less than 35%.
So how do they solve for this? Because there are lots of very positive factors in this economy, and we don't have the supply chain issues that we once had. So where do we go from here?
Well, I'll say this. It's not entirely President Biden's fault. I mean, the seeds of inflation were sown long ago. I mean, I'll go back to 2018 in October, under the Trump administration, when President Trump, who as candidate Trump, talked about a bubble being created by the central banks, by the Federal Reserve, helping the Obama administration. As President Trump, he said, hey, interest rates are too high. He browbeat that guy into lowering rates. That started it. The tax cuts came at the exact wrong time in the cycle, and then things started to move from there. You talk about Putin's inflation. Yeah, maybe. Nobody saw it coming. He had 100,000 troops on the border of Ukraine. What do you think was going to happen? So a lot of this stuff, if you were just paying attention, you could have combated.
Yeah, I would say, it's not fair to say that they've completely lost the war on inflation. We went from 9% to 3%. Like, we've won a lot of the war.
But Ben knows
we got a ways to go. But we've done a lot.
Under this administration, since he started, inflation's up cumulatively almost 19%. So, we can play the numbers game all you want. The reality is, for a lot of people out there, they're hurting. And wages on the private sector are not nearly keeping up with what we're seeing on the government side of the equation.
Yeah, I mean, it's true that it's not helpful to Biden in that he was just starting to get the tiniest little glimmer of hope on the economy. Like people's minds were starting to turn a bit and say, okay, this economy's not so bad. The jobs market is good. My wages are a little bit over inflation. But now they get hit, with this. People don't pay attention to these nerd numbers like we do, but they notice that stuff that costs a lot more is not coming down and is just rising a little less fast. That's not great.
Okay.
And so he loses that momentum from a great jobs number to this.
But do I need to remind you?
Remind me.
We were supposed to be in a recession right now.
Fair
right?
enough.
So I get it. We're not having a star-spangled spectacular in terms of the economy. But think about where economists
100%.
across the board predicted we would be.
I think the lag, and I don't want to go into the weeds here at 11:45 at night on a beautiful evening, but the lag effects of those rate hikes, which I thought would kick in last year, I was 100% wrong. Just because they haven't doesn't mean they won't.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's what you have to be on guard about, Steph.
Yeah, I think that's true. The lag effects are going to slow the economy more, but if inflation is still where it is now, it won't matter to the Fed. They're much more interested in getting rid of 3% inflation, getting it to 2, not letting it be sticky. That could even mean, I don't know, hikes towards the end of the year if inflation stays this sticky. That would be a scary thought if you're sitting in the White House or the re-election campaign.
Can we go back to consumer goods? Because you were just talking about this shrinkflation argument. Why do all these businesses have to offer less in their boxes? Why do they have to raise their prices? They're making money hand over fist.
So
You're talking about
over-the-counter
drug prices. Look at how much these companies are making.
Well, that's the argument. I understand. So now we're going down an entirely different route in terms of capitalism and free markets and stuff. I hear what you're saying, and we can have that argument, but I think it's an entirely separate argument. If you think companies are making too much money, then we're going to start to we're going to have to litigate the entire system that we're living in.
Price controls, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody wants that, Steph.
Well, there are definitely some people who do. I'm not sure anyone at this table does.
Fair enough.
However, to say that these companies have to raise their prices, they don't. So aren't they contributing to the situation that we're in?
Okay, so here we go. Ben has thoughts on this as well. You want to pay people more? That's great. I'm all for it. Federal Express I think in August announced, right, or UPS, excuse me.
UPS.
They had with their drivers over the next 5 years, $170,000 annual pay. That's fantastic.
And
Guess
then what did
happened?
they do? Massive layoffs.
Massive layoffs. So there's an other side of the equation here, right?
There is. And they are going to be very fast always to pass their cost increases on to consumers. And I agree with you, Stephanie, that there are examples of gouging where there doesn't need to be in profits that are outside what we would really like to see. But again, you'd have to reorganize the economy to deal with a lot of that. But it's clearly going to be a problem for the president and for the Fed. And part of the reason we're here is because they started way too late in fighting inflation when it started. Remember all the transitive stuff, like this is going to go away. So they had to raise a lot. They had to raise fast. And we're going to see the impacts of that on the economy as we go forward.